Right, so in yesterday's video, I was introducing this notion of the depth of the NI unconscious, a depth perhaps not explored before with such insistence, with such tension, and hopefully with such success, but you will be the judge of that. Now, I want to insist on this fact because we cannot exaggerate it. What are the channels, what are the books where the NI unconscious is really tackled head on and engaged and excavated as much as it is attempted in this channel? Like, I've read some people sometimes on the internet say that like I talk about NI too much, and granted that's possible, but that's also because like either you want a superficial understanding of NI and then you're happy with a couple of videos, or you want a deeper understanding of NI and you're going to need more content. In fact, you're going to need infinite content, for as deep as you want to go. Not everyone has to want to go as deep as others, but it's something that I'm interested in. Now, doing this from an NI perspective, my NI perspective, of course, it's going to follow a sort of NI thought pattern with circling, recurrence, divergence, convergence, manifesting sometimes as rambling, returning to the same topics only to open more chapters of those topics and so forth. That's the spiraling form and structure of any NI-led kind of exploration. Okay, so now that that's said, I was making the point, but I haven't explained, the reasoning behind this point, that, well, first of all, INFJs and INTJs, the more I try to grapple with the NI unconscious, the more it seems to me that we have not insisted enough on just how close those two types are. Of course, there's no doubt that since they are both NI dominant, in the community, in the literature, people do talk about the fact that these two types have lots in common and are arguably the closest type to INFJ, INTJ, the closest type to INTJ, INFJ. It's not, arguably is not a strong enough word, first of all. And this is not shared by everyone. Like, you still find people who think that INFJs are closer to ENFJs, or that INFJs are closer to ISTPs, or that they're closer to, I don't know, and for INTJs, I suppose, sometimes people say that they're closer to INFPs than they are to, or ISFPs than they are to INFJs, or of course closer to ENTJs than they are to INFJs. And honestly, this phrase that I'm using, the dominant function of any type, gives a world, which means it's qualitatively different from the other functions. Functions 2, 3, 4 are pretty much to be compared along the same lines in terms of quantitative difference. To what extent, what is the quantum of energy that is available to be deployed for this, that, or the other function through 2, 3, 4. It's higher for auxiliary, a little bit less for tertiary, less for inferior. In the case of the dominant function, there's not just a quantitative difference in the sense that it's the one that has the most amount of energy freed up for it. That's true, but there's also a qualitative difference, and in many ways, the qualitative difference is the most important difference. Is that in addition to this whole domain of the energy and the quantitative differences, the dominant function gives a world, which is to say that it is the one function that structures how the person who possesses effectively that function as dominant, it is how they organize. It is how their inner world organizes the structure of how they experience the outer world, right? They provide the medium through which the outer world is experienced. And in that respect, we might say, if we were to use a slightly more technical, learned term, that they are the function responsible for the basic phenomenological structure, the basic phenomenology of experience for the person. So an INFJ experiences the world in an NI way. They don't experience the world in an FE way. They don't experience the world in a TI way. And they certainly don't experience the world in an SE way. They experience the world in an NI way. The only other type who experiences the world in an NI way is the INTJ. So the INFJ and the INTJ actually experience the world phenomenologically very much the same way. Not true of the INTJ and the ENTJ, not true of the INTJ and the INFP, not true of the INFJ and the ISTP, not true of the INFJ and the ENFJ. Right? In that respect, of course, INFJ and INTJ are closest cousins, but the similarities that so far, I would argue, have been shown to be a little more than just superficial, but not that deep. They can be deepened significantly. And I think that the way that we can start appreciating just how these this kinship between the INFJ and the INTJ goes deeper than we think. It's very deep. It can be shown by the fact that they share the same fundamental fantasy, and that this fantasy is one of repair. I've talked about the nerve syndrome in INFJs. I've made videos on that topic. You can refer back to them. I intimated that the nerve syndrome, as most people really ought to know at this point, even the people who are only looking for more superficial understandings of these issues, the nerve syndrome is bad. The nerve syndrome is pathological. The nerve syndrome is something that ought to be cured in the person who has the nerve syndrome, not the people that she or he thinks ought to be cured through their nursing potential, their nursing abilities. Like, so the nerve syndrome is bad. The nerve syndrome is not good. Okay. But the nerve syndrome is, it's not present in INTJs, no denying that, which means that, yes, it has an FE expression. It has to do with people, what you want to heal. If someone who has a nerve syndrome, of course, there's a spectrum of severity. A lot of people operate with a more neurotic kind of nerve syndrome, you know. It's not very intense. They still have this tendency to think they can fix people. They still have the tendency, they think they can heal people, okay? And it lands them in difficulties, can land them in not so good relationships, toxic relationships, or not so good friendships. But to say that, you know, it's a pathological level of nerve syndrome, perhaps we wouldn't go that far. It depends on where you are exactly on the spectrum. Nevertheless, the nerve syndrome is the expression of a deeper fantasy structure, which is the structure of repair. This idea that, in this case, the INFJ organizes experience and therefore their relationship to the world in a way that provides a narrative about the healing of the world. They heal themselves through this unconscious fantasy that they can heal the world. And in fact, INTJs also. And if you look at a lot of famous INTJs, it becomes apparent. It's just that since their function of extroverted judgment is not a social function, primarily, it's not FE, it's TE, it's an impersonal function that has to do more in the first instance with things and objects. Their fantasy of repair expresses itself through projects that have to do with things and objects that can then, once achieved, provide a narrative of repair that becomes obvious to other people. It's almost like the INFJ needs to show other people, right, that certain patterns connect, and in fact, we'll see how that itself represents a repairing of a reparation of a broken tissue, right? Linking two patterns is always, in the unconscious fantasy, fixing broken tissue, fixing torn tissue. And the INTJ just does the thing, and the very fact that they do the thing, engineers the thing, shows that the patterns could be reconnected, and the same follows. We'll stop here, and we'll continue in the next videos. Guys, don't forget about me. Giving you a like helps massively with referencing. My Patreon page is linked below. Could not do this without you. Please consider supporting me. A few bucks a month, and it goes a long way. You get access to cool perks like a big library, a vault of deep dive videos only for patrons that I've recorded, long formats, as well as access to our specific and special Discord server, the Fourfold. Interact with me every day and the others there every day as well. It's really cool, so please join us. Read the Ecstatic Soul to know all about the inner world of the INFJ, my classic first book on the INFJ, and its sequel, the infinite world on the external world of the INFJ, or how their inner world, as explored in the Ecstatic Soul, interacts with the external world, and how to lead a good INFJ life as a result. Those 2 books are linked below in the description box. Get them if you haven't yet, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.